The dawn of a new beginning. The sun broke through the horizon, its rays spilling over the landscape like liquid gold, heralding a day of celebration and new beginnings. It was the day James and Amara had been dreaming of, their wedding day, a day they had envisioned for years, but one that came after long battles, both personal and professional. The venue they had chosen was more than just a beautiful mansion. It was a symbol of the journey they had traveled together. Located on the outskirts of the city, the mansion was a historic estate, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, giving its visitors a chance to breathe deeply and reflect on the beauty around them. The gardens were particularly stunning this morning. Centuries-old oak trees stood tall and proud, their branches spreading wide as if offering blessings. Delicate floral arrangements adorned the aisles leading to the grand arch where the couple would exchange their vows. The arch itself was a masterpiece, draped in white roses, orchids, and greenery, as if nature itself had come to witness this sacred union. There was a buzz of excitement in the air as guests began to trickle in. But behind the scenes, there was a quiet, intimate moment happening between two people who had worked hard to arrive at this place. James stood in front of the full-length mirror in his dressing room, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored tuxedo. His face was calm, but beneath the surface, there was a nervous energy. This wasn't the nervousness of doubt. No, James was certain about his decision to marry Amara. Rather, it was the weight of the moment, the realization that everything they had worked for, everything they had endured, had brought them to this point. As an FBI agent, James had faced danger and uncertainty countless times, yet today felt different. This was a different kind of commitment, one that felt more personal, more vulnerable. He glanced at the photograph sitting on the table beside him, a picture of him and Amara taken during a hiking trip early in their relationship. They looked so carefree, so happy, and that same feeling of joy rushed over him as he thought about her. Almost ready, came the voice of his best man, Ethan, as he knocked and entered the room. James smiled, turning toward him. "Yeah, just trying to make sure I don't look too FBI for this wedding." Ethan chuckled, a sound that instantly lightened the room. "Man, you're marrying one of the most powerful judges in the state. Trust me, no one's going to be worried about how FBI you look." James laughed and shook his head. Ethan had been his best friend since their academy days, and there was no one else he would have wanted standing beside him on this day. Ethan, always the joker, knew how to ease the tension, but today there was a deeper respect in his voice, an acknowledgement of the significance of this moment. Meanwhile, across the mansion, in a suite overlooking the gardens, Amara was surrounded by her bridesmaids, all dear friends who had been with her through various stages of her life. The air was filled with laughter and excitement as they helped her into her wedding gown, a custom design that fit her like a second skin. The fabric shimmered subtly, a perfect blend of elegance and sophistication, much like Amara herself. As she stood in front of the mirror, the room quieted for a moment. Amara was not just beautiful, she was radiant. There was a glow about her, a quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and where she was going. But today, there was also something softer, more tender in her expression. Her bridesmaids exchanged glances, each recognizing the change in their friend. Amara had always been the strong one, the driven one, who had tackled every challenge in her life with determination and grace. But today there was something different, a vulnerability that only love could bring out. "You look breathtaking," Nia, her best friend and maid of honor, said softly, stepping forward to adjust a small detail on Amara's dress. Amara smiled, her heart full. "Thank you," she whispered. "I can't believe this day is finally here." Nia grinned. "Well, James is about to faint when he sees you, that's for sure." Amara laughed, but there was a flicker of nervousness in her eyes. She turned back to the mirror and caught her own reflection, her fingers gently brushing the lace of her dress. It was more than just a wedding gown, it was a symbol of the woman she had become. The journey to this day hadn't been easy. She had faced countless obstacles, not only as a woman but as a woman of color climbing the ranks to become one of the youngest judges in the state. There had been doubts, challenges, and, at times, outright hostility. But she had persevered, just as she had with James by her side. Her thoughts drifted back to the day they had first met, in the most unlikely of places, during a high-profile criminal case. She had been a prosecutor, and he had been assigned as the lead investigator. They had started off on rocky ground, two fiercely independent and driven individuals who didn't easily back down. But as the case unfolded, they had found in each other a mutual respect that slowly blossomed into something more. Their love had been a quiet, steady force, growing stronger with each trial they faced, both in the courtroom and in life. "Amara," Naya said, her voice pulling her from her thoughts. "You ready for this?" Amara took a deep breath and smiled, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears of joy. "I've never been more ready." But as Amara and her bridesmaids continued their final preparations, an entirely different scenario was unfolding just beyond the gates of the mansion. In a small suburban neighborhood not too far from the wedding venue, an elderly woman named Mrs. Evelyn Harding peered out from her window, her face twisted in displeasure. She had noticed the increase in traffic along the usually quiet street and had seen several cars turning toward the mansion that had, in her mind, been far too active in recent months. The old estate had been a staple of the community for decades, a serene landmark that was now, as she put it, attracting all sorts of noise and commotion. Today, however, something felt particularly bothersome. She had seen groups of people arriving in elegant attire, but to her, it felt disruptive. And as much as she hated to admit it, the sight of a few guests of different ethnic backgrounds arriving at what she assumed was a high-class event didn't sit well with her. Prejudices she barely acknowledged to herself bubbled to the surface. She frowned, reaching for her phone. "There's something not right about all this," she muttered to herself. And so, with a sense of self-righteousness, she dialed the non-emergency line of the local police department. "Hello, yes, I'd like to report some suspicious activity near the old Willowbrook mansion," she said, her voice firm. "There are some people gathering there, and I'm not sure if it's legal or not, but it looks like trouble." As she hung up the phone, Mrs. Harding felt a grim satisfaction, convinced she had done her duty. Little did she know, the call she had just made would set off a chain of events that would soon turn this beautiful wedding day into a much larger story, one that no one could have anticipated. The police, unaware of the significance of the day, would soon arrive to investigate her baseless complaint. But what they would find when they stepped onto the grounds of the mansion would leave them utterly speechless. The disruption of peace. As the wedding guests continued to fill the magnificent estate, the excitement and anticipation grew with every passing moment. A soft string quartet played in the background as attendees mingled, each dressed in their finest attire, reflecting the significance of the event. Friends and family members from both sides of James and Amara's lives were present, a diverse group that included judges, FBI agents, lawyers, activists, and longtime friends from their childhoods. Despite the differing backgrounds and professions, everyone was united in their admiration for the couple and their love story, a story that had withstood the tests of time, adversity, and most importantly, societal expectations. Underneath the canopy of the towering oak trees, conversations buzzed. A sense of awe seemed to flow through the crowd as they took in the beauty of the venue. This wasn't just any wedding. It was the union of two remarkable individuals whose journey had inspired many. Amara, with her rise to becoming a renowned judge, and James, with his distinguished service in the FBI, had become symbols of perseverance, excellence, and love. Their story had become the stuff of legend among their peers, a power couple who had managed to balance their demanding careers while supporting one another through thick and thin. Unbeknownst to the joyful gathering, just beyond the iron gates of the estate, a different scene was unfolding. Two police cruisers slowly pulled up to the entrance, their blue and red lights flashing subtly as the officers inside exchanged puzzled glances, Officer Daniels, a seasoned member of the local police force, looked at his partner, Officer Matthews, with a raised eyebrow. Suspicious activity at a wedding, Daniels muttered, clearly doubtful of the complaint they had received. This has to be one of those false alarms again. I swear, some people just don't like seeing other folks have a good time. Matthews nodded in agreement as he turned off the flashing lights, not wanting to alarm anyone unnecessarily. Yeah, well, we've got to check it out either way. Dispatch, said the caller, sounded concerned. He said the last word with a tone that suggested he knew exactly what kind of concern they were dealing with. An uptight neighbor uncomfortable with the sight of so many cars parked near their quiet community. As they approached the gates, they were met by a security guard stationed there, a well-built man in a black suit with an earpiece, who stepped forward to greet them. "Officers, how can I help you?" he asked, his voice calm but professional. Daniels, who had already taken note of the elegant decorations and the peaceful atmosphere, waved his hand dismissively. "We received a call about some suspicious activity happening around here. Seems like someone didn't get the memo about the wedding." The security guard's face relaxed into a knowing smile. "Ah, I see. Yes, this is the wedding of Judge Amara Williams and FBI Special Agent James Carter. Everything here is secure and running smoothly. There's no trouble, officers." The mention of the names hit both officers like a freight train. Daniels blinked, taking a moment to process what he'd just heard. "Wait, did you say Judge Williams and Agent Carter?" The security guard nodded, still smiling. "Yes, sir. They're the ones getting married today. I assure you, everything here is under control." Officer Matthews let out a low whistle. "Wow. I didn't know they were getting married today. I've heard a lot about them." Daniels, however, was still reeling from the absurdity of the situation. Here they were, responding to a complaint from some cranky neighbor, only to discover that the people they were investigating were two of the most respected individuals in the city. He shook his head in disbelief. "Well, that's just great. We're here because some nosy neighbor decided to call in a report about suspicious activity at one of the most high-profile weddings this city has seen." The security guard chuckled softly, understanding the ridiculousness of the situation. "It happens, but thank you for coming out. I'll make sure you're listed as attending officers, just in case anyone asks." Daniel sighed. "We'll stick around for a minute just to make sure everything's good. The last thing we need is someone accusing us of not doing our job." As the officers lingered near the entrance, they could hear the laughter and music drifting from the gardens inside. Matthews leaned against the patrol car, glancing at the perfectly manicured lawns and floral arrangements visible through the gates. "You know," he said, "it's kind of funny, isn't it? How people like that neighbor can get so worked up over nothing. I bet if they actually saw who was here, they'd feel pretty foolish." Daniel smirked. "Yeah, well, ignorance has a funny way of making people bold." Inside the estate, oblivious to the minor drama unfolding outside, the wedding preparations continued without interruption. Amara stood at the center of the bridal suite, surrounded by her bridesmaids as they made the final touches on her gown and makeup. The air in the room was electric, filled with the kind of excitement that could only come from knowing that the next few moments would change her life forever. "Okay, Amara," Naya said, her voice full of emotion, "it's almost time. Are you ready?" Amara took a deep breath, steadying herself as she looked around at the faces of her closest friends. These women had been with her through every phase of her life, through law school, clerkships, and courtrooms, through heartbreaks and triumphs. They had seen her at her lowest and celebrated with her at her highest, and now they were standing beside her as she prepared to marry the man who had become her anchor in a world that often felt tumultuous. "I've never been more ready," Amara replied softly, her voice steady with resolve. She looked out the window, seeing the guests taking their seats beneath the archway. The sight filled her with warmth. The love and support in that garden were palpable, and it gave her the strength she needed to move forward. Her thoughts drifted back to James, The two of them had always been a team, even before they realized they were in love. Their relationship had grown from a mutual respect for each other's strength, intellect, and commitment to justice. In a way, their love had been inevitable, two souls bound by a shared purpose, finding solace in each other's understanding of the weight they both carried in their respective careers. As Amara's bridesmaids finished the last adjustments, her heart swelled with love for James. He had always been her greatest supporter, her equal in every way. And today was about more than just exchanging vows. It was about acknowledging the journey they had taken together and the partnership they had built, one based on mutual respect, admiration, and an unshakable belief in each other. "All right," Amara said, her voice firm, but filled with emotion. "Let's do this." Meanwhile, in the groom's quarters, James was experiencing a similar wave of emotions. Standing in front of the mirror, he couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had changed since meeting Amara. She had been a force of nature from the very beginning, fiercely intelligent, passionate, and unyielding in her pursuit of justice. But beneath her strength was a warmth and kindness that had drawn him in, making him fall for her in ways he hadn't thought possible. As he straightened his tie for what felt like the 100th time, Ethan, his best man, slapped him on the back with a grin. "Man, you look like you're about to face down in an interrogation room full of suspects." James laughed, shaking his head. "It's just surreal, you know. I faced criminals, spies, and every kind of threat you can imagine. But this is different." Ethan chuckled. "Well, that's what happens when you're about to marry someone as extraordinary as Amara. You've got every right to be nervous." James nodded, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and anticipation. "Yeah, she really is something else." But as he turned toward the door, ready to step outside and begin the next chapter of his life, there was a sudden knock. The door opened, and one of the estate staff members poked his head inside, looking slightly flustered. "Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Carter," the man said, his voice apologetic. "But there's a situation outside." James furrowed his brow. "What kind of situation?" The man hesitated before speaking. "There are police officers at the gate. Apparently, someone called them about suspicious activity." James blinked in surprise. "Police? At our wedding?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What kind of suspicious activity?" The staff member shrugged, clearly as confused as the rest of them. "They said it was a neighbor who made the call. But don't worry, they've realized it's just a misunderstanding. They're talking to security now." James let out a slow breath, his initial concern giving way to amusement. Of course, there had to be some kind of hiccup today, but it was nothing they couldn't handle. With a smile, he glanced at Ethan. "Guess we're making headlines before we even say I do." Ethan grinned, as if you two weren't already the talk of the town. But as James stepped outside, his mind briefly wandered to the deeper issue at play. What kind of world were they living in where a joyous celebration like this could be interrupted by something as trivial and potentially prejudiced as a neighbor's suspicion? It was a reminder of the battles that still lay ahead, not just for him and Amara, but for the world they were trying to make better. Today, however, was about love. And nothing, not even an unwarranted visit from the police, was going to stop that. Love under siege. James stepped into the cool autumn air, the sunlight bathing the gardens in a soft golden hue. The air smelled of fresh flowers, the scent of roses and jasmine mingling with the crispness of the morning. He could see the rows of white chairs filled with guests, and the floral arch under which he would soon be standing, waiting for Amara. A surge of emotion welled up in him at the thought of her walking down the aisle, radiant and confident, ready to become his wife. But before he could fully lose himself in the moment, his mind returned to the strange interruption that had just been brought to his attention. Ethan, always the steadying force, clapped James on the shoulder. "It's all taken care of, man. No need to let it ruin your big day." James nodded, though his thoughts were still spinning. The idea of the police being called to his wedding seemed so absurd. But then he knew that absurdity was often a mask for something more insidious. He had spent years in law enforcement, and he understood better than most the ways prejudice could creep into everyday life. Something about this situation felt off, and it wasn't just the inconvenience of the police showing up. It was the why. "Yeah, you're right," James finally said, though his voice held a trace of unease. "Let's get through the ceremony. We've got bigger things to focus on today." With one final deep breath, James straightened his jacket and prepared to head to the ceremony site. He glanced at his best man, who was already grinning in anticipation of the momentous occasion, and allowed himself to refocus on what truly mattered: his future with Amara. Nothing was going to ruin this day, not if he had anything to say about it. Meanwhile, inside the bridal suite, Amara was putting on the final touches. Her hair was styled perfectly, soft waves cascading down her back, and her makeup was a subtle accent to her natural beauty. She stood before a large mirror, looking at her reflection. This was the culmination of everything she had ever dreamed of: the career, the love, the life she had worked so hard to build. But as she smoothed down her dress, her phone vibrated from the vanity table. She glanced at it, intending to ignore it in favor of staying focused on the day. But the name on the screen caught her eye: one of her court colleagues, who wouldn't have called on her wedding day unless it was something urgent. With a quick apology to her bridesmaids, she stepped aside and answered the call. "Amara," her colleague said, voice low and hurried, "I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but you need to know. There was a police call made about your wedding." Amara's heart skipped a beat. "A police call? What do you mean?" Her colleague hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Apparently, a neighbor called in a report about suspicious activity. The police were dispatched, but when they arrived and found out it was your wedding, they realized it was a false alarm. "Still, I thought you should know. There's been some chatter in certain circles. Some people aren't happy about the visibility you and James have right now. You're making waves, and not everyone likes that." Amara felt a surge of anger rise within her, though she kept her voice steady. "So, someone called the police because we're having a wedding. That's what this is about." "Yes," her colleague confirmed. "And we both know it's not just about the wedding. It's about what you and James represent. You've both risen to positions of power, and some people can't handle seeing that. They're trying to find ways to knock you down." Amara's grip tightened on her phone, her jaw clenched in frustration. She had always known that success came with its own set of challenges, but she hadn't expected this on her wedding day of all days. Yet, as the initial wave of anger passed, a familiar sense of resolve settled over her. She had dealt with worse, far worse, and she wasn't going to let this ruin what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. "Thanks for letting me know," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I appreciate it." After ending the call, Amara stood there for a moment, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She had faced discrimination before, both subtle and overt, throughout her career. She had dealt with colleagues who underestimated her because of her gender, her race, or simply because of their own insecurities. But this was different. This was personal. It wasn't just about her career. It was about her love, her happiness. She and James had worked so hard to build a life together, and now, on the day they were supposed to celebrate that life, someone had tried to taint it with their own biases. Nia noticed the change in Amara's expression and approached her quietly. "What's wrong?" Amara shook her head and smiled, though the weight of the moment still lingered. "It's nothing. Just someone trying to stir up trouble. But it's not going to work." Nia frowned, concerned. "What do you mean? What kind of trouble?" Amara hesitated, not wanting to burden her best friend with the details. But Nia had been by her side through everything, and she deserves to know. A neighbor called the police, claiming there was suspicious activity at the wedding. The officers showed up, but it was just a false alarm. I think we both know what that means." Nia's eyes flashed with anger. "Are you serious? On your wedding day? That's ridiculous." "Yes, it is," Amara said, her voice steady. "But it's not going to ruin this for me. James and I have faced worse than this. We'll get through it." Nita's expression softened, admiration in her eyes. "You're stronger than anyone I know. Amara, don't let them get to you. Today is about you and James, nothing else." Amara smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude for the women who had always stood by her side. "You're right. Let's go make this day one to remember." Back outside, the officers who had responded to the call were wrapping up their brief investigation. Officer Daniels shook his head as he made a final note in his report. "This is one for the books," he muttered. "A wedding for a federal agent and a judge, and someone calls it in as suspicious. Ridiculous." Officer Matthews, who had been quietly observing the guests and the security team, nodded. "You think this was racially motivated?" he asked in a low voice, glancing toward the estate. "Because it sure feels like it." Daniels didn't answer immediately. He didn't like making assumptions, but after years on the force, he knew how deeply ingrained prejudice could be. "I wouldn't be surprised," he finally said. "People have a hard time seeing others succeed, especially when they don't fit the mold they're used to. But there's nothing we can do about that now. The wedding's going ahead, and from what I've seen, there's nothing suspicious going on here, unless you count a lot of well-dressed people celebrating a beautiful day." Matthews chuckled. "Yeah, no doubt. Let's finish up here. The last thing these folks need is for us to hang around and cause more of a scene." As the officers wrapped up, the mood inside the estate continued to build toward the ceremony. Guests were seated. The sun had reached its peak, casting a perfect light over the garden, and the string quartet played softly as they awaited the bride's entrance. James had already taken his place at the altar, standing beneath the floral arch with a look of pure anticipation on his face. As Amara walked down the grand staircase from the bridal suite, her father waiting at the bottom to escort her, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. All of the noise, all of the distractions from earlier, none of it mattered now. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment where she and James would declare their love and commitment to one another in front of all the people they cared about. As her father took her arm, he smiled at her, his eyes misty with pride. "You look beautiful, sweetheart. James is a lucky man." Amara smiled back, feeling the love and support radiating from her father. "Thank you, Dad. I'm ready." With her heart full, she stepped outside, her eyes immediately locking on James, who stood waiting for her at the end of the aisle. He looked handsome and strong, his eyes filled with the same love and admiration she felt in her own heart. And in that moment, as she began her walk toward him, everything else faded away. The world outside the gates, the challenges they had faced, the prejudice they had encountered, it all disappeared. All that mattered now was the two of them, standing together, ready to face whatever the future held. As Amara reached the altar, the world seemed to slow down. Time itself seemed to stretch, and all the guests, the flowers, the music, faded into the background as she took James' hand. His eyes sparkled with emotion as he gazed at her, and in that moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift from their shoulders. "Amara," he whispered, "you're everything I've ever dreamed of." "And you," she replied, her voice full of love, "are the man I've waited my whole life for." Together, they stood, their hands entwined, ready to take the next step into the future. Nothing, not the interruptions, not the prejudice, not the challenges they had faced, could diminish the power of this moment. It was their day, their love, and no one could take that away from them. As the officiant began to speak, there was a sense of unity that swept through the entire gathering. This was more than just a wedding. It was a celebration of love's ability to overcome even the most difficult of obstacles. And as James and Amara prepared to exchange their vows, they knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their incredible journey together. Little did they know, however, that the world beyond the mansion's gates was still watching, and the events of this day would soon ripple out in ways they could never have anticipated. The love beyond barriers. As James and Amara stood at the altar, hand in hand. The sun above bathed them in golden light. The quiet hum of the string quartet provided a soft undertone to the moment, a perfect contrast to the emotions twirling around them. Their world, in this moment, was defined only by the two of them. All of the external noise, the police visit, the prejudice lurking in the shadows, seemed distant, like an echo that would fade as quickly as it had come. Right now, nothing could touch them. The officiant, an old friend of the couple and a respected judge himself, began the ceremony with a warm smile. His voice was deep and steady, filled with reverence for the occasion, but also with the intimacy that came from years of knowing the journey James and Amara had taken to arrive here. His words wove a story of love, partnership, and resilience, characteristics that defined both the individuals standing before him and the relationship they had built together. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant began, "we are gathered here today not just to witness the union of two remarkable people, but to celebrate a love that has transcended barriers, defied expectations, and weathered every storm. James and Amara, your love is a testament to what is possible when two souls, committed to one another, decide to stand firm against all odds." Amara's heart swelled as she listened. Her eyes remained locked on James, and she saw her own emotions mirrored in his gaze. There was love, yes, but also something deeper, a shared understanding, a quiet strength. They had faced many challenges together, both in their careers and in their personal lives. But their love had never wavered. It had only grown stronger, fortified by the very obstacles they had encountered. As the officiant continued to speak, a sense of calm settled over the gathering. The guests, who had been buzzing with excitement earlier, now sat in quiet reflection, fully immersed in the gravity of the moment. The day had started as a celebration of love, but it was now turning into something larger, something that spoke to the power of unity in the face of division. Outside the gates of the mansion, however, the world wasn't as serene. The police had wrapped up their investigation, filing their report and leaving the scene. But the incident hadn't gone unnoticed. In the age of smartphones and social media, news of the police presence at a prominent couple's wedding had quickly spread. Guests had posted photos and videos online, and soon the story took on a life of its own. Comments flooded in from all corners of the internet, some in disbelief, others with a bitter edge of cynicism. "What do you expect?" one commenter wrote. "People like them will always face this kind of scrutiny. They need to get used to it. They're being targeted because they're successful, plain and simple," another countered. "And it's disgusting that this is happening in 2024. The story quickly became a viral topic of discussion, with people from around the world weighing in on what had happened. The debate wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It had evolved into a broader conversation about race, privilege, and power in modern society. Some saw it as an isolated incident, while others pointed to it as evidence of deeper, systemic issues that couldn't be ignored. The wedding had unintentionally become a lightning rod for these discussions, and amidst all of this, there were whispers from certain factions that viewed the union of James and Amara as a threat. Powerful figures, both in the legal and law enforcement communities, weren't entirely comfortable with the visibility the couple had gained. Though neither James nor Amara had sought the spotlight, their prominence as a couple, one a highly respected federal agent, the other a rising judicial star, made them symbols of progress. And not everyone embraced that progress with open arms. Within hours, the police report had been leaked to the media. News outlets began running stories about the wedding, framing it as a racially charged incident, with headlines like, "Police called to high-profile wedding. Neighbors' suspicion raises questions about racial bias." Though the articles were speculative, the underlying message was clear. This wasn't just about one wedding. It was about a society still grappling with its deepest prejudices. But inside the mansion, none of this noise had yet reached the couple or their guests. They were still blissfully unaware of the brewing storm. As James and Amara stood facing each other under the arch, it was time to exchange their vows. The officiant stepped aside, giving them the space to speak their hearts. James, ever the calm and composed agent, found himself surprisingly emotional as he gazed into Amara's eyes. He had prepared a few words, but as he stood there, the rehearsed speech faded from his mind, replaced by the raw truth of his feelings. Taking a deep breath, he began. "Amara," he said, his voice soft but clear, "when I met you, I thought I knew what strength was. I thought I understood resilience. But you showed me what it really means to fight for what you believe in, to stand tall in the face of adversity. You've always been my partner, in every sense of the word. And today, I vow to continue being yours, for the rest of our lives." He paused, emotion welling up in his chest as he continued. "I vow to support you, to challenge you, and to grow with you. I promise to be by your side through every battle, every victory, and every setback. You are the most incredible person I have ever known, and I am beyond grateful to have you as my wife." Amara's eyes shimmered with unjust tears. The sincerity in James's voice wrapped around her like a blanket, warming her from the inside out. She had always known he was her partner in every way, but hearing him articulate it with such clarity made her heart swell with even more love. When it was her turn to speak, she took a moment to collect herself. Unlike James, Amara had always been more open with her emotions, more willing to wear her heart on her sleeve. But today, the depth of what she felt seemed almost impossible to put into words. "James," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat, "you came into my life when I wasn't looking for love. I was focused on my career, on making a difference in the world. But you changed everything. You showed me that it's possible to be both strong and vulnerable, to be independent but still rely on someone else. You've been my rock, my confidant, and my greatest ally. I can't imagine my life without you." Her voice softened as she spoke her next words, and the tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. "I vow to love you, to stand by you, and to fight for you, just as fiercely as you have always done for me. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams, and to share in your burdens. Together, we are stronger than anything the world could throw at us, and I can't wait to see where our journey takes us." The crowd was silent, captivated by the intimacy of the moment. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath in reverence for the love being expressed beneath the arch. The officiant smiled warmly at the couple, nodding to them both before he spoke again. "James and Amara, the vows you have shared today are more than just words. They are promises, spoken from the heart, that will guide you as you walk through life together. And it is my great honor to pronounce you husband and wife." The applause that erupted from the crowd was thunderous, but to James and Amara, it was a distant sound. They were still locked in each other's gaze, lost in the moment. James leaned forward and kissed his bride, a kiss filled with all the love, respect, and devotion they had for one another. It was a kiss that spoke of partnership, of unity, of a love that would endure whatever trials might come their way. As they turned to face their guests, hand in hand, they were met with a sea of smiling faces and joyful cheers. The world, for now, was perfect. As the couple began their walk back down the aisle, the guests standing to applaud and congratulate them, a feeling of triumph settled over the scene. This was a victory, not just for James and Amara, but for everyone who had ever faced discrimination, doubt, or prejudice, and continued to rise above it. But just beyond the mansion's gates, the real world was still spinning. News outlets had begun sending reporters to the scene, and camera crews were setting up outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the high-profile wedding that had now become the center of a viral story. The police visit, trivial as it had seemed, was now the focal point of a much larger conversation about race, privilege, and justice. Inside the estate, as the reception began, James and Amara still had no idea what awaited them beyond the walls of the mansion. For now, they were focused on the joy of the moment, surrounded by family, friends, and the love they had fought so hard to protect. But soon enough, the outside world would come crashing in, and their story would take on a life of its own. The challenges they had faced so far were only the beginning, and while their love had been a source of strength, they would soon discover that the world wasn't quite ready to let them have their happy ending without a fight. The calm before the storm. The reception was in full swing, and the atmosphere was electric. The sprawling garden, now transformed into a reception area with twinkling lights and elegant decor, felt like something out of a dream. Guests were seated at long tables draped in white linens, adorned with delicate floral arrangements that mirrored the colors of the autumn landscape. Laughter filled the air, and the clinking of champagne glasses punctuated conversations as everyone toasted to the newlyweds. At the center of it all were James and Amara, glowing with happiness. They moved effortlessly through the crowd, exchanging hugs and handshakes with their guests, thanking them for coming. The joy in the air was palpable, the love between the couple undeniable. For now, the world beyond the mansion walls had faded into the background, leaving only this perfect moment. The band struck up a lively tune, and the dance floor began to fill. Amara and James swayed in each other's arms during their first dance as husband and wife, their movements synchronized as though they had been dancing together their whole lives. They whispered to each other small words of love and gratitude that only they could hear. Around them, the guests watched with warm smiles, knowing they were witnessing something rare and beautiful. Amara's father, who had been quietly observing the scene from his table, dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. His little girl, his fierce and brilliant Amara, was now a wife. He had always known she would achieve great things, had seen the fire in her eyes even when she was a child. But seeing her now, in her wedding dress, smiling up at the man she loved, filled him with a kind of pride he hadn't expected. As the song came to an end, the applause was thunderous. But James and Amara stayed close, holding each other as if reluctant to let go. It was a moment that felt like it could stretch on forever. But eventually, they were pulled back into the world of their guests, who were eager to celebrate with them. As the night wore on, the reception became a blur of laughter, dancing, and heartfelt speeches. Amara's best friend and maid of honor, Nia, gave a moving toast that brought tears to many eyes. She spoke about the strength and resilience of their friendship, and how Amara had always been someone who lifted others up, even when she herself was carrying the weight of the world. "You've always been a warrior, Amara," Nia said, raising her glass. "You've fought for justice, for truth, and for all the people you care about. And now, with James by your side, I know you'll continue to fight for the things that matter. Here's to a lifetime of love, laughter, and victories, both personal and professional." James's best man, Ethan, followed with a more humorous speech, poking fun at James's serious demeanor and how it had taken Amara's charm to finally break through his stoic exterior. "I've known James for years," Ethan said, "and I can honestly say I've never seen him as happy as he is with Amara. You two are a perfect match, and if anyone can take on the world together, it's the two of you." The speeches were followed by more dancing, the clinking of glasses, and the soft murmur of conversations. The night felt like it would stretch on forever, a perfect celebration of love and unity. But as the evening began to wind down, and the guests started to filter out one by one, the outside world began to creep back in. Unbeknownst to the couple, the media frenzy outside had only grown. By the time the reception had started, news outlets had begun running live reports from just outside the estate. Reporters speculated on everything from the police presence earlier in the day to the high-profile nature of the wedding itself. Commentators debated whether the police call had been racially motivated, and whether the incident spoke to larger issues within the community. Some even questioned whether the couple's prominence in their respective fields had made them targets for jealousy or resentment. Breaking news tonight, one reporter announced during a live broadcast, standing just beyond the gates of the estate. Earlier today, police responded to a report of suspicious activity at the wedding of federal agent James Carter and Judge Amara Williams. The call was determined to be a false alarm, but it has sparked a heated debate online about race, privilege, and the challenges faced by high-profile interracial couples. The debate was not confined to just the news media. Social media platforms had erupted with opinions, theories, and reactions to the incident. Some people defended the couple, arguing that they were being unfairly targeted because of their success and the fact that they represented a shift in traditional power dynamics. Others, however, took a more critical stance, claiming that the couple's visibility had drawn unwanted attention and that the police were simply doing their job. One particularly viral tweet read, "So let me get this straight. An interracial couple with power and influence gets married, and suddenly there's suspicious activity. We all know what this is about. Racism is alive and well, folks." But not all the reactions were supportive. Others took a different angle, accusing the couple of flaunting their privilege. "This whole thing reeks of elitism," one post read. "They want us to feel sorry for them because the police showed up. Meanwhile, regular people deal with this every day." The polarization of the conversation was inevitable. The combination of race, power, and success had always been a volatile mix, and now James and Amara had found themselves at the center of it. For many, they were symbols of progress, of what was possible when barriers were broken. But for others, they were a reminder that the status quo was shifting, and not everyone was comfortable with that change. Back at the reception, as the night began to draw to a close, Amara and James finally had a moment to themselves. They had retreated to a quiet corner of the garden, away from the crowd, where the soft glow of lanterns illuminated their faces. The stars above were bright, and the cool night air was a welcome relief from the heat of the day. Amara leaned her head against James's shoulder, a contented smile on her lips. "Can you believe we're married?" she asked, her voice soft and filled with wonder. James chuckled, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Verily, it still feels surreal." They stood in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching as the last of the guests trickled out, the sounds of the party slowly fading away. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that allowed them to finally take a breath after the whirlwind of the day. But even in this moment of tranquility, there was an undercurrent of something else, something neither of them had acknowledged yet, but that both of them could feel. "Do you think it's over?" Amara asked suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. James looked down at her, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" She sighed, turning to face him fully. The police showing up earlier, the whispers, the looks from some of the guests. "Do you think that was just a one-time thing? Or is this something we're going to have to deal with from now on?" James' expression grew serious, and for a moment, he didn't answer. He had been asking himself the same question ever since the police visit, but he hadn't wanted to voice it, not today, not on their wedding day. But he knew Amara deserved honesty. "I don't know," he admitted finally, "but we've dealt with this kind of thing before, right? We've always found a way through." Amara nodded, though her eyes were distant, lost in thought. "It's just, I thought today was going to be perfect. I didn't think we'd have to deal with something like this. Not here. Not now." James reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. "Hey," he said softly, his voice steady. "Today was perfect. Because we're together, and we're married, and none of that other stuff matters. We'll deal with whatever comes our way, just like we always have." She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know. I just wish the world would let us have this one day. Just this one." James pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I wish that too. But no matter what happens, I'll always be here. We'll always have each other." Amara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. In that moment, it was enough. They had faced challenges before: prejudice, injustice, the long hours of demanding careers that sometimes kept them apart. And they had always come out stronger. Today would be no different. But even as they stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, the world outside was moving, shifting. The story of their wedding was no longer theirs alone. It had been picked up, dissected, and turned into a symbol of something larger, something they hadn't asked for, but would now have to navigate. For now, though, they could only hold on to each other, savoring the last moments of their perfect day before the storm truly hit. As the last of the lanterns flickered out and the garden fell silent, a new chapter in James and Amara's life had begun. They didn't yet know what awaited them beyond the gates of the estate, but they did know one thing. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that, more than anything else, was their greatest strength. The battle beyond the gates. The next morning, the golden light of dawn gently filtered through the curtains of the honeymoon suite, casting a warm glow over the room. James stirred first, blinking away the remnants of sleep as he looked down at Amara, who lay peacefully beside him. Her face was relaxed, serene, as if the weight of the previous day had finally lifted in the safety of their shared space. For a moment, everything felt perfect again, just the two of them, newly married, savoring the quiet of the morning after the whirlwind of their wedding. James smiled to himself, stroking Amara's hair as she slowly woke up, her eyes fluttering open. When their gazes met, her lips curled into a soft, sleepy smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," James whispered. Amara stretched languidly and laughed, her voice still husky from sleep. "I could get used to hearing that." He leaned down, kissing her forehead. "I hope so, because you're stuck with me now." For a few moments, they basked in the glow of their first morning as husband and wife, lost in the bliss of their new reality. But all too soon, reality knocked at their door, quite literally. A soft but insistent knock echoed from the other side of the door, pulling them both from their reverie. James groaned, reluctantly untangling himself from Amara and sitting up. "Who could that be this early?" he muttered, glancing at the clock. It wasn't even 8 a.m. yet. Amara's brow furrowed, the carefree warmth in her expression dimming slightly. "Maybe it's just room service. We didn't order anything, but maybe it's complimentary." But the moment James opened the door, he knew it was much more than that. Standing outside their suite was Ethan, his best man, looking unusually tense. Behind him was Nia, Amara's maid of honor, her arms crossed and her face a mixture of concern and frustration. "Sorry to barge in like this," Ethan said, his voice low but urgent. "But you two need to see this." James's stomach dropped. "What's going on?" Ethan exchanged a quick glance with Nia, then handed James his phone. "It's all over the news. Social media, too. Last night, after the wedding, the story blew up." James took the phone, scrolling through headlines that made his heart sink. "Police called to judge's wedding. Racial bias or honest mistake. Wedding interrupted by police presence raises questions of discrimination. High-profile couple's big day becomes lightning rod for debate on race and privilege." Each article, each tweet, seemed worse than the last. The story had exploded overnight, turning what had been a minor inconvenience, something they thought they had left behind them at the wedding, into a national spectacle. Amara, who had come to stand beside him, took the phone from James's hand, her eyes scanning the headlines with disbelief. This can't be real," she murmured, her voice tinged with both shock and anger. "I'm afraid it is," Nia said softly, stepping forward. "We started seeing the posts right after the reception ended. People were filming the police outside, and some guests posted about it. It didn't take long for it to go viral. Now everyone's talking about it." Amara handed the phone back to James and turned away, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if trying to ward off the sudden chill that had settled over the room. "So now our wedding is a news story. Perfect," she said bitterly. James reached for her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "We knew something like this might happen. We talked about it before, remember? People were always going to have opinions about us, about our marriage. We've dealt with it before." Amara shook her head. "Not like this. This isn't just gossip or whispers at work. This is a public spectacle. People who don't even know us are talking about us, judging us. All because someone didn't like the idea of a black judge and a federal agent getting married in a nice neighborhood." She clenched her fists, anger radiating off her in waves. They called the police on us. On our wedding day. And now we have to defend ourselves. Defend our love, our lives, against this nonsense. Nia, always the voice of reason, stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Amara's arm. Amara, listen. I know this is awful. It's unfair. And it's wrong. But this doesn't change what yesterday was. Your wedding was beautiful. You and James were beautiful. And none of this can take that away. James nodded in agreement. Nia's right. Yesterday was about us, about our love. No headline, no tweet, no ignorant neighbor can take that from us. Amara let out a slow, frustrated breath, some of the tension in her shoulders easing. I know. It's just. I wanted one day where we didn't have to deal with this. I get it, James said softly, pulling her into his arms. Believe me, I get it. But we're in this together, like we always have been. Whatever comes next, we'll face it the way we've always faced things, side by side. Amara relaxed against him, her face buried in his chest as she allowed herself to breathe, to let go of some of the weight she had been carrying. For a moment, everything was quiet again, the storm outside their door momentarily forgotten. But it wasn't gone. The storm was brewing, and soon they would have no choice but to face it head-on. Later that morning, James and Amara sat down together at a small table in the suite, joined by Ethan and Nia, who had stayed to help them navigate the fallout. The air was thick with tension as they scrolled through article after article, trying to grasp the full extent of the media frenzy. I can't believe how fast this spread, Amara muttered, shaking her head. It's like a wildfire. People are dissecting our entire lives now, our careers, our marriage, everything. That's how it is these days, Ethan said grimly. Something catches fire online, and suddenly it's everywhere. You two are high profile. And now this incident has become a symbol for something much bigger than just the wedding. Amara stared at her phone, her fingers gripping it tightly. I didn't ask to be a symbol. No, Nia agreed, but sometimes we don't get to choose when we become one. You've always known that being in the public eye comes with challenges, especially as a black woman in a position of power. But this is different. Amara sighed. It shouldn't be. We shouldn't have to justify our success or our love. We shouldn't have to deal with people projecting their issues onto our lives. But here we are. James remained silent, his jaw clenched as he scrolled through the comments online. There was support, yes, but there was also vitriol. People who couldn't accept the idea of a powerful interracial couple who viewed their success as some kind of threat. You're going to have to respond, Ethan said after a long pause. Both of you. Staying silent will only fuel the fire. People will keep talking, speculating, unless you address it directly. James nodded slowly, his mind racing with how best to handle the situation. I agree. We need to control the narrative. We can't let this be twisted into something it's not. Amara looked up, her eyes sharp with determination. So what do we say? Nia leaned forward, her voice steady. You tell the truth. You talk about the wedding, the love you share, and the fact that this was supposed to be a day of celebration. But you also acknowledge what happened, the police being called, the racial undertones of the whole thing. And you stand your ground. You don't let them turn this into some kind of pity story. You're not victims. You're a couple who's been targeted because of who you are, and that's not acceptable. James nodded, his hand finding Amara's under the table. We speak out together. Let people know that this won't define us. Amara squeezed his hand in return, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of resolve and love. Together, she said softly. Always together. Later that afternoon, after drafting a statement with the help of Ethan and Nia, James and Amara sat in front of a camera, ready to address the world. It wasn't how they had imagined spending the day after their wedding, but they knew it was necessary. The media storm wasn't going to die down on its own, and they needed to take control of the narrative before it spiraled even further. As the camera began recording, Amara took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. James sat beside her, his presence grounding her as they prepared to speak their truth. "Hello," Amara began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "My name is Amara Williams, and this is my husband, James Carter. Yesterday, we were married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by our family and friends. It was a day we had looked forward to for a long time. A day that was meant to be about love, unity, and celebration." She paused, glancing at James before continuing. "However, during our wedding, the police were called by a neighbor, claiming there was suspicious activity at our venue. This incident has since gone viral, sparking a national conversation about race, privilege, and discrimination." James picked up from where Amara left off, his voice calm but firm. "We are deeply saddened that what should have been a joyful occasion was marred by such an incident, but we are not surprised. As an interracial couple, and as individuals in positions of influence, we have faced prejudice and bias before. We know that our success, our love, and our very existence challenge certain people's worldviews." Amara's eyes shone with determination as she spoke again. "But we want to make one thing very clear. We will not allow this to define us. Our wedding day was perfect because we were surrounded by love, and no amount of ignorance or hate can take that away. This is not just our story. It's the story of every couple, every individual who has had to fight to be seen, to be heard, and to be respected." James squeezed her hand, his voice filled with emotion. "We stand together, not just as a couple, but as a testament to what love can overcome. And we will continue to fight, not just for ourselves, but for a world where love and equality are the norm, not the exception." The statement ended, but the battle beyond the gates was just beginning. Their love, tested and tried, was now on a national stage. But together, James and Amara would face the storm, just as they always had, side by side, unshaken and unbreakable.